The snow fell heavy over Cincinnati that December afternoon. The downtown streets were already covered by a thin white layer that muffled the sounds of the city. Pete Rose walked briskly down Vine Street, his coat collar turned up against the icy wind that cut across his face. At 83 years old, he was no longer the young athlete who ran the bases at Great American Ballpark, but he still maintained that firm, almost defiant posture that had made him a baseball legend. He was returning from an autograph session at a sporting goods store downtown. Even after all the years of controversy and banishment from the Hall of Fame, Pete was still adored in Cincinnati. For Reds fans, he would always be Charlie Hustle, the man who played every game as if it were his last. The thermometer read 10 degrees, and the few people on the streets rushed inside stores or heated cafes. Pete looked up at the gray sky, heavy with snow, and quickened his pace toward the parking lot where he had left his car. That's when he saw him. Sitting in a narrow alley between two old buildings, almost invisible under layers of cardboard and dirty rags, was a man. His graying beard was full of ice, and his hands, red and swollen from the cold, trembled as they tried to hold an empty plastic cup. There was no one around. People passed by in a hurry, looking straight ahead, ignoring that forgotten figure. Pete stopped. Something about that man made him pause, as if an inner voice was calling him. He approached slowly. "Hey, buddy," Pete said, his hoarse voice cutting through the alley's silence. "You all right?" The man slowly lifted his eyes. They were tired, empty eyes that seemed to have given up long ago. He didn't respond, just looked at Pete with an expression mixed with distrust and resignation. Pete crouched down beside him, feeling the cold from the concrete penetrate his pants. "What's your name?" Pete asked gently. After a long silence, the man murmured, "Jimmy. Jimmy Caldwell." The voice was weak, almost a whisper, as if he had forgotten how to use words. "Jimmy," Pete repeated, as if memorizing it. "How long have you been out here?" Jimmy shrugged, an almost imperceptible gesture. "I don't know. Months, maybe. I lost count." Pete felt a tightness in his chest. He looked around. The alley was filthy, with accumulated garbage and puddles of dirty frozen water. How could anyone survive there in the middle of an Ohio winter? "Did you eat today?" Pete asked. Jimmy shook his head no. "Yesterday neither." Pete stood up and took his wallet from his pocket. He pulled out some bills and extended his hand to Jimmy. "Here," he said. "Go get something to eat. There's a diner right around the corner." But Jimmy didn't take the money. He just looked at the bills as if they were something unreal, something that didn't belong in his world anymore. "Why?" Jimmy asked, his voice barely audible. "Why do you care?" Pete was silent for a moment. The question hung in the cold air between them. Why did he care? He could simply walk away, get in his warm car, go home to his comfortable house. But something about Jimmy reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. "Because you're a human being," Pete finally said. "And it's freezing out here. Nobody should be alone in this cold." Jimmy's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly looked away, as if ashamed of showing emotion. "I used to be somebody," Jimmy whispered. "I had a job, a family, a life." "What happened?" Pete asked, sitting down on a crate beside him, ignoring the cold seeping through his clothes. Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, as if gathering the courage to speak words he had kept locked inside for too long. "I was a machinist," he began, his voice trembling. "Worked at the Ford plant in Sharonville for 23 years. Good pay, benefits, the whole thing. My wife, Sarah, she was a nurse at Christ Hospital. We had 2 kids, Billy and Emma. Billy was going to go to college, first one in our family. Emma, she loved to paint, wanted to be an artist." He paused, his breathing heavy with the weight of memories. "Then the plant closed. 2019. They said it was restructuring, moving operations to Mexico. Just like that, after 23 years, I was out. I was 58 years old. Who wants to hire a 58-year-old machinist when younger guys will work for less?" Pete listened intently, saying nothing, letting Jimmy speak. "I tried, you know. Sent out hundreds of applications, took whatever jobs I could find. Warehouse work, delivery driving, even tried learning new skills at the community college. But nothing stuck. The bills started piling up. We burned through our savings in 8 months. Then Sarah got sick." Jimmy's voice cracked. "Breast cancer, stage 3. The treatments, God, the treatments cost everything. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. The deductibles, the co-pays, the medications they wouldn't cover. We remortgaged the house, sold everything we could. But it wasn't enough." A tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "She fought for 2 years, 2 hard years, and then she was gone. My Sarah was gone. And we had nothing left. The medical bills, they took the house. Billy had to drop out of college to work. Emma stopped painting, stopped doing anything. She couldn't forgive me for not being able to save her mother, for losing everything. "That's not your fault," Pete said firmly. "None of that was your fault." Jimmy shook his head. "My kids, they tried to help at first. But they had their own lives, their own struggles. Billy got married, had a baby. Emma moved to Colorado, trying to start over. They offered to let me stay with them, but I couldn't. I couldn't be a burden. I couldn't watch them struggle because of me." "So you ended up here," Pete said quietly. "I ended up here," Jimmy confirmed. "At first I stayed in shelters, but they're crowded, dangerous. People steal your stuff and there's never enough space. Then I found this spot. It's quiet. People leave me alone. Most days I wish they'd leave me alone forever." The raw pain in those last words hit Pete like a punch to the gut. He had known hardship in his life, the gambling scandal, the banishment from baseball, the public shame, but he had never known this kind of desperation, this complete loss of everything that made life worth living. Pete looked at Jimmy, really looked at him, and saw not just a homeless man, but a father, a husband, a worker who had done everything right and still lost everything. He saw a man who had been forgotten by the system he had paid into his whole life, abandoned by a society that had no use for him anymore. "Listen to me, Jimmy," Pete said, his voice strong and clear. "You're not ending your story here in this alley. Not today, not ever." Jimmy looked at him with those hollow eyes. "What's the point? There's nothing left." "The point is, you're still breathing," Pete said. "The point is tomorrow might be different than today. The point is, I'm not walking away and leaving you here to freeze to death." He stood up and extended his hand to Jimmy. "Come on, get up. We're getting you somewhere warm." Jimmy stared at Pete's outstretched hand for a long moment. In that hand, he saw something he hadn't seen in years: hope. It scared him. Hope had disappointed him so many times before. But there was something about this stranger, this man who had stopped when everyone else walked by, that made Jimmy want to believe again. Slowly, with trembling hands, he reached up and took Pete's hand. Pete pulled Jimmy to his feet. The man was lighter than he expected, frail from months of malnutrition. Jimmy swayed slightly, unsteady on his feet. "When's the last time you saw a doctor?" Pete asked. "Can't remember," Jimmy said. "Years, maybe." Pete wrapped an arm around Jimmy's shoulders, steadying him. "All right, first things first. We're getting you to a hospital, getting you checked out." "I can't afford," Jimmy began. "Don't worry about that," Pete cut him off. "One step at a time. Right now we focus on getting you healthy." As they walked out of the alley together, Pete felt Jimmy lean on him heavily. The man was weak, exhausted, barely able to put one foot in front of the other, but he was moving. That was something. They reached Pete's car, a black Lincoln Navigator parked 2 blocks away. Pete helped Jimmy into the passenger seat and turned the heat up to maximum. Jimmy closed his eyes as the warm air hit his frozen face, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than cold. As Pete drove toward University of Cincinnati Medical Center, he glanced over at Jimmy, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. The man's face was peaceful for the first time since Pete had met him, free from the constant vigilance required to survive on the streets. Pete thought about his own life, about all the times he had felt like he was at the bottom, like the world had turned against him. The gambling scandal in 1989 that got him permanently banned from baseball, the years of denial, the public humiliation, the doors that closed in his face. He'd been rejected by the Hall of Fame multiple times, his achievements erased from the narrative of baseball history despite holding the record for most career hits. But through it all, he had never been alone. He had family, friends, fans who still believed in him. He had money, a home, opportunities. He had never faced the absolute desolation that Jimmy had experienced. Maybe, Pete thought, this was why their paths had crossed today. Maybe this was his chance to do something that mattered more than any baseball game, any record, any Hall of Fame. Maybe this was his chance to remind someone that they mattered, that their life had value, that they weren't invisible. At the hospital, Pete helped Jimmy inside. The emergency room was busy with the usual winter crowd. Flu cases, slip and fall injuries from the ice, elderly patients with pneumonia. The triage nurse looked up as Pete approached with Jimmy. "This is Jimmy Caldwell," Pete said firmly. "He's been living on the streets for months. He needs a full examination, hasn't eaten properly in days, possibly weeks. He needs help." The nurse, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, looked at Jimmy with professional assessment, then at Pete with recognition. "Mr. Rose?" she asked, surprised. "Yeah," Pete said. "And before you ask for an autograph, can we please make sure my friend here gets taken care of first?" Patricia nodded quickly, her professionalism kicking in. "Of course. Let me get him registered. Does he have insurance? Put it on my account, Pete said. Whatever he needs, I'm covering it. Mr. Rose, that could be expensive, Patricia began. I don't care, Pete interrupted. This man needs help. Can we focus on that, please? Within minutes, Jimmy was taken back to an examination room. Pete stayed with him, refusing to leave, even when the doctors suggested he could wait in the lobby. He watched as they took Jimmy's vitals, drew blood, checked his heart and lungs, assessed him for frostbite and malnutrition. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Chen, pulled Pete aside after the initial examination. Mr. Rose, your friend is in rough shape, Dr. Chen said quietly. He's severely malnourished, dehydrated and showing signs of early-stage frostbite on his fingers and toes. His blood pressure is dangerously low, and his white blood cell count suggests he's fighting off at least one infection. We need to admit him, get him on IV fluids and antibiotics, monitor him for at least a few days. Do whatever you need to do, Pete said. Just help him. We will, Dr. Chen assured him, but I have to ask, what's your relationship to Mr. Caldwell? Are you family? Pete looked through the window at Jimmy, who lay on the hospital bed looking small and vulnerable under the white sheets. No, Pete said. We just met today, but that doesn't mean I'm not responsible for him now. Dr. Chen studied Pete's face for a moment, then nodded with understanding. The world needs more people like you, Mr. Rose. Jimmy spent 3 days in the hospital. During that time, Pete visited every day, sometimes twice a day. He brought Jimmy real food, not hospital food, but actual meals from local restaurants. A chicken pot pie from Prima Vista, Cincinnati-style chili from Skyline, a proper steak sandwich from Eli's BBQ. He brought clean clothes, toiletries, magazines, anything to make Jimmy's stay more comfortable. On the second day, as Jimmy sat in his hospital bed eating the best meal he'd had in over a year, he looked at Pete with confusion and gratitude mixed together. Why are you doing this? Jimmy asked. You don't even know me. Pete sat in the chair beside the bed, leaning back with his arms crossed. You asked me that before, Pete said, and I'll tell you the same thing. Because you're a human being who needed help. It's that simple. But you're Pete Rose, Jimmy said. You're famous. You got your own problems, your own life. Why waste your time on someone like me? Someone like you? Pete repeated, leaning forward. Jimmy, you worked for 23 years, raised a family, took care of your wife when she was sick. You sacrificed everything for the people you loved. You're exactly the kind of person worth helping. Jimmy's eyes welled up with tears. I feel like I failed everyone, he whispered. My wife, my kids, myself. I had one job, to take care of my family, and I couldn't do it. Pete shook his head firmly. You didn't fail anyone. The system failed you. You played by all the rules, worked hard, did everything right. And when you needed help, where was it? Where were the safety nets? Where was the support for workers when companies decided profits were more important than people? Jimmy was quiet, absorbing Pete's words. You know, Pete continued, people think I'm some kind of hero because I got a bunch of hits in baseball, but that was just a game. A game I loved, sure, but still just a game. You, Jimmy, you're the real hero. You fought for your family every single day. You survived when most people would have given up. That takes real strength. I don't feel strong, Jimmy said. I feel broken. Broken things can be fixed, Pete said. Trust me, I know something about being broken and putting yourself back together. Over the next few days, as Jimmy's physical health improved, Pete started working on a plan. He called in favors, reached out to old friends, contacted local charities and organizations. He was determined to give Jimmy not just a meal or a warm bed for a few nights, but a real chance to rebuild his life. On the 4th day, when Jimmy was discharged from the hospital, Pete picked him up in his Navigator. Where are we going? Jimmy asked as they drove through downtown Cincinnati. You'll see, Pete said with a slight smile. They drove to the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood, one of Cincinnati's historic areas that had undergone significant revitalization in recent years. Pete pulled up in front of a renovated brick building. What is this place? Jimmy asked. It's called New Beginnings Housing, Pete explained. It's a transitional living facility for people getting back on their feet. I called in a favor with the director, guy named Tom Reynolds, used to be a huge Reds fan. They have a room available for you. Jimmy stared at the building, then at Pete. I can't afford. It's paid for, Pete interrupted. 3 months, fully covered. You'll have your own room, shared kitchen and bathroom facilities, and they offer job training and placement services. But there's a catch. What's that? Jimmy asked warily. You have to actually try, Pete said, looking Jimmy straight in the eye. You have to show up for the job training, meet with the counselors, put in the work. I can open the door, Jimmy, but you have to walk through it. Jimmy felt a surge of emotion, fear, hope, gratitude, all mixed together. He had been given a second chance, something he never thought he'd have again. "I'll try," Jimmy said, his voice strong. "I promise I'll try." "That's all I ask," Pete said. They went inside together. Tom Reynolds, the director, was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He showed them around the facility, clean, modest rooms, a common area with a TV and books, a kitchen where residents could prepare meals together. "We have about 20 residents right now," Tom explained. "Most of them are in situations similar to yours, Jimmy. Lost jobs, lost homes, trying to get back on their feet. We're not just a place to sleep. We're a community. We help each other here." Jimmy's room was small but clean. A single bed, a dresser, a desk, a window that looked out onto the street. After months of sleeping in an alley, it looked like a palace. "Thank you," Jimmy said to both Tom and Pete. "I don't know how to repay this." "Pay it forward," Pete said. "When you're back on your feet, help someone else who needs it." Over the following weeks, Jimmy threw himself into the program at New Beginnings. He attended every job training session, met regularly with his assigned counselor, a woman named Sandra, who specialized in helping middle-aged workers transition to new careers. He took classes in computer skills, updated his resume, practiced interview techniques. Pete visited regularly, checking in on Jimmy's progress. He'd take Jimmy out for lunch, have long conversations about life and baseball and redemption. Pete shared his own story, the gambling addiction, the ban from baseball, the years of struggling to accept what he'd done wrong while still maintaining his dignity. "People wanted me to just disappear," Pete told Jimmy over lunch at a diner one afternoon. "After the scandal, a lot of folks said I should just go away, stop trying to defend myself, stop showing my face. But I couldn't do that. This is who I am. I made mistakes, yeah, but I'm still Pete Rose. I'm still the guy who got 4,256 hits. They can ban me from the Hall of Fame, but they can't take away what I did on the field." "Do you regret it?" Jimmy asked. "The gambling?" Pete was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Every day," he finally said. "Not just because of what it cost me, but because of what it did to the game I love. Baseball gave me everything, my identity, my purpose, my life. And I disrespected it. That's something I have to live with. But you're still here," Jimmy observed. "Still fighting, still standing." "Damn right," Pete said with a grin. "You don't get 4,256 hits by giving up when things get tough. You get them by showing up every single day and giving everything you've got. That's what I'm asking you to do, Jimmy. Show up. Give it everything you've got." Jimmy nodded, feeling strengthened by Pete's words. 6 weeks into his stay at New Beginnings, Jimmy got an interview at a manufacturing company in Norwood. It wasn't exactly his old field, but the plant produced industrial equipment and needed someone with mechanical knowledge. Sandra helped him prepare, running through practice questions, helping him craft his story in a way that was honest but hopeful. The night before the interview, Pete called Jimmy. "You ready?" Pete asked. "Nervous," Jimmy admitted. "It's been so long since I did this." "What if I blow it?" "Then you blow it," Pete said matter-of-factly, "and you get up and try again. Jimmy, you've survived things that would have killed most people. You can handle one interview." "What if they ask about the gap in my employment? What if they ask where I've been?" "You tell them the truth," Pete said. "You tell them you fell on hard times, you lost everything, and you're working hard to get back on your feet. You tell them you're at New Beginnings, and you're serious about rebuilding your life. Any company worth working for will respect that honesty." Jimmy took a deep breath. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I can do this." "Damn right you can," Pete said. The next day, Jimmy put on the suit Pete had bought him. Nothing fancy, just a clean, respectable suit from Macy's. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Gone was the hollow-eyed, broken man from the alley. In his place was someone who looked like they had hope, like they had purpose. The interview was at Henderson Manufacturing, a mid-sized company that had been in Cincinnati for 40 years. Jimmy met with the plant manager, a no-nonsense woman named Carol Hendricks, who had worked her way up from the factory floor. "Walk me through your experience, Mr. Caldwell," Carol said, looking at his resume. Jimmy took a deep breath and told his story. He talked about his 23 years at the Ford plant, his skills as a machinist, the quality of work he had always taken pride in. Then, when she asked about the gap in his employment, he told her the truth. "I lost my job when the plant closed," he said. "And then I lost my wife to cancer. The medical bills took everything. I ended up homeless for several months. I'm not proud of that, Ms. Hendricks, but I'm not ashamed either. I did what I had to do to survive. And now I'm doing what I have to do to rebuild. I'm staying at a transitional facility, working with counselors, retraining. I'm here because I want to work. I want to contribute. I want to be the man I used to be. Carol studied him for a long moment. That takes guts, she finally said. Being honest like that, a lot of people would try to hide it, make up some story. I respect that you didn't. I've learned that honesty is all I have left, Jimmy said. I'm not going to start lying now. Carol nodded slowly. We've had good experiences hiring people from New Beginnings, she said. Tom Reynolds, the director there, he only sends us people who are serious about turning their lives around. If you're one of those people, Mr. Caldwell, then I think we can find a place for you here. Jimmy felt his heart race. Are you saying? I'm saying we'll start you on a trial basis, Carol said. 30 days. You show up on time, you work hard, you prove you're reliable, then we make it permanent. Full benefits, 401k, the whole package. Deal? Jimmy's eyes filled with tears, but this time he didn't look away. Deal, he said, reaching across the desk to shake her hand. Thank you, you won't regret this. When Jimmy left the interview, he immediately called Pete. I got it, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I got the job. I never doubted you for a second, Pete said, and Jimmy could hear the smile in his voice. Now you go celebrate. You earned this, Jimmy. That evening, Pete took Jimmy out to Jeff Ruby's Steakhouse, one of Cincinnati's finest restaurants. As they sat in the elegant dining room, Jimmy felt completely out of place in his borrowed suit, surrounded by well-dressed professionals and wealthy diners. But Pete treated him like an honored guest, ordering them both the finest steaks and raising his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, Pete said. To second chances, Jimmy added. And to the stranger who stopped when everyone else walked by. As they ate, Jimmy opened up about his children, something he'd been reluctant to discuss before. I haven't talked to Billy or Emma in over a year, Jimmy admitted. They tried to reach out when I first ended up on the streets, but I pushed them away. I didn't want them to see me like that. I was too ashamed. Maybe it's time to reach out, Pete suggested. Show them you're getting back on your feet. Let them back in. What if they don't want anything to do with me anymore? Jimmy asked, voicing his deepest fear. What if I hurt them too much? Then at least you tried, Pete said. Jimmy, your kids loved you enough to try to help you when you were at your lowest. That kind of love doesn't just disappear. Give them a chance to be proud of you again. Jimmy started his new job at Henderson Manufacturing the following Monday. The work was hard, operating machinery, quality control checks, inventory management. But it was honest work, and Jimmy threw himself into it with the dedication of a man who knew what it meant to have nothing. His co-workers were friendly but cautious at first. They knew he had come from New Beginnings, which meant he had a story. But Jimmy didn't hide from it. When they asked, he told them the truth in simple terms. He had lost everything, ended up on the streets, and was fighting to get his life back. Most of them respected that honesty. Some even shared their own struggles. A gambling problem, a divorce, a bankruptcy. Everyone had their battles. Carol Hendricks kept a close eye on Jimmy during his trial period. She noticed how he arrived 15 minutes early every day, how he stayed late to finish tasks properly, how he helped newer employees learn the ropes. He reminded her of workers from an earlier generation, people who took pride in their craftsmanship and reliability. After 2 weeks, Carol pulled Jimmy aside. You're doing good work, Caldwell, she said. Keep it up, and the permanent position is yours. Thank you, Ms. Hendricks, Jimmy said. I won't let you down. So meanwhile, Pete continued to be a constant presence in Jimmy's life. They'd meet for breakfast on Saturday mornings at Anchor Grill, a classic Cincinnati diner that had been serving the city since 1940. Over eggs and bacon, they'd talk about everything and nothing. Sports, politics, the weather, memories of better times. One Saturday in late January, Pete brought up the subject of Jimmy's children again. Have you thought about what I said? Pete asked. About reaching out to your kids? Jimmy had been thinking about it constantly, but fear kept holding him back. I don't even know where to start, Jimmy admitted. What do I say? Hey kids, remember your dad who disappeared and lived in an alley for months? Well, I got a job now, everything's fine. You start with the truth, Pete said. You tell them you're sorry for pushing them away. You tell them you're getting help and you're working hard to rebuild your life. You tell them you love them and you'd like the chance to be their father again. What if they slam the door in my face? Jimmy asked. Then you try again, Pete said. And you keep trying until they're ready to listen. Jimmy, you taught me something important. You told me about how you took care of your wife when she was sick, how you fought for her every single day, even when things looked hopeless. That's the same fight you need to bring to this. Your kids are worth fighting for. Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right, he said. I need to at least try. That evening, with his hands shaking, Jimmy composed an email to his son Billy. He had managed to find Billy's email address through a bit of online searching. His son worked as an accountant at a firm in Mason, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati. The email went through several drafts. Jimmy wrote and deleted, trying to find the right words. Finally, he settled on something simple and honest. Dear Billy, I know it's been a long time since we talked. I know I pushed you away when you tried to help me, and I'm sorry for that. I was ashamed of what I had become, and I didn't want you to see me at my lowest. I'm writing to tell you that I'm doing better now. I found help, and I'm working again. I have a job at a manufacturing company, and I'm living in a transitional facility while I save up for my own place. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to talk to you, to explain, to try to be your father again. I understand if you're angry with me. I understand if you need time. But I want you to know that I love you, and I'm proud of you, and I think about you every single day. Your father, Jimmy Caldwell. He stared at the email for 10 minutes before finally hitting send. Then he closed his laptop and waited, his heart pounding with anxiety and hope. 3 days passed with no response. Jimmy checked his email obsessively morning, noon, and night. Nothing. He began to lose hope, convincing himself that Billy wanted nothing to do with him. Then, on the 4th day, there was a reply. Dad, I was surprised to hear from you. Mom and I tried to find you for months after you disappeared. Emma even hired a private investigator, but you had vanished completely. We thought maybe you were dead. Part of me wished you were, because at least then we'd have closure. I'm not going to lie and say everything is fine, because it's not. You hurt us when you pushed us away. You hurt us when you refused our help. But I'm glad you're getting better. I'm glad you're working again. I'm not ready to see you yet. I need some time to process this, but I'm willing to stay in touch through email for now. Maybe eventually we can talk on the phone, and then maybe meet in person. Emma lives in Denver now. She doesn't check her email much, but I'll let her know you reached out. Billy. Jimmy read the email 5 times, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't the warm reunion he had hoped for, but it was something. It was a door left open, not slammed shut. It was a chance. He immediately wrote back, thanking Billy for responding and respecting his need for time. He told Billy about his job, about new beginnings, about the progress he was making. He asked about Billy's family, his daughter that Jimmy had never met. Over the following weeks, father and son exchanged regular emails. The conversations were tentative at first, tiptoeing around painful subjects, but gradually they began to share more. Billy told Jimmy about his life, his work as an accountant, his wife Rachel, who taught 3rd grade, his daughter Sophia, who was 3 years old and loved dinosaurs. Jimmy shared his own journey. The darkness of living on the streets, the moment Pete Rose found him in that alley, the long road to recovery. He didn't sugarcoat anything or make excuses. He took responsibility for his choices, even while explaining the circumstances that led to them. One Saturday morning, Pete noticed Jimmy seemed particularly emotional when they met for breakfast. "What's going on?" Pete asked. Jimmy showed him his phone, where Billy had sent a text message with a photo attached. The photo showed a little girl with curly brown hair and her mother's smile, holding up a crayon drawing. The text read, "Sophia made this for you. She calls you Grandpa Jimmy." The drawing was a simple child's sketch of stick figures holding hands, one tall figure, one small figure, grandfather and granddaughter. Pete looked at Jimmy and saw tears running down his friend's face. "That's beautiful, Jimmy," Pete said quietly. "I have a granddaughter," Jimmy said, his voice filled with wonder. "I have a granddaughter who made me a drawing, and I've never even met her." "You will," Pete assured him. "Give it time. You're doing everything right." In early February, Jimmy completed his 30-day trial period at Henderson Manufacturing. Carol Hendricks called him into her office on what should have been his last day. "Sit down, Caldwell," she said, and Jimmy felt his stomach drop. Had he done something wrong? Was he being let go? Carol pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "These are your permanent employment papers," she said with a slight smile. "Welcome to the team. You've earned it." Jimmy felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. "Thank you, Ms. Hendricks. You don't know how much this means to me." "I think I do," Carol said. "I've been where you are, Caldwell. Not homeless, but rock bottom in my own way. Had a drinking problem in my 30s, almost lost everything. Someone gave me a second chance and I've never forgotten it. So now I do the same for others when I can. She stood up and extended her hand. Keep doing what you're doing. Show up, work hard, be honest. That's all I ask. That evening, Jimmy shared the news with everyone at New Beginnings. Tom Reynolds organized a small celebration in the common room. Nothing fancy, just pizza and soda and a cake that said, "Congratulations, Jimmy." But to Jimmy, it felt like the most important celebration of his life. Pete came to the celebration bringing along a special gift, a framed photo of the two of them taken outside the hospital the day Jimmy was discharged. In the photo, Jimmy looked thin and uncertain, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. "I wanted you to have this," Pete said, "to remember where you started and how far you've come." Jimmy took the frame with trembling hands. "I'll never forget," he said. "Never. You saved my life, Pete." "No," Pete corrected gently. "I just gave you a hand up. You saved your own life by choosing to take that hand and do the work. That was all you, Jimmy." As February turned into March, Jimmy continued to build his new life piece by piece. He had been saving money carefully, living frugally at New Beginnings while putting away every dollar he could for his own apartment. Tom Reynolds helped him understand the process, showing him how to find affordable housing, how to apply for apartments, how to navigate the system. His correspondence with Billy grew more frequent and more personal. They moved from emails to phone calls, having long conversations on Sunday evenings about everything and nothing. Billy told Jimmy stories about Sophia, and Jimmy could hear the love in his son's voice. Sometimes Billy would put Sophia on the phone, and Jimmy would talk to his granddaughter, his heart breaking and healing at the same time. Emma was slower to come around. She had been deeply hurt by her father's disappearance, and the wounds were still raw. But Billy kept her updated on Jimmy's progress, and eventually she sent a brief email saying she was glad he was doing better. It wasn't much, but for Jimmy, it was everything. One evening in mid-March, as Jimmy sat in his room at New Beginnings, working on a budget spreadsheet, his phone rang. It was Billy. "Dad," Billy said, his voice nervous but determined. "Rachel and I have been talking. We'd like you to come over for dinner. Meet Sophia properly, if you're ready." Jimmy's hands started shaking. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't want to impose or make things uncomfortable." "We're sure," Billy said. "It's time. How about next Saturday, around 5? "I'll be there," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, son. Thank you for giving me this chance." That Saturday, Jimmy woke up before dawn, too nervous and excited to sleep. He spent the morning cleaning his room, trying on different outfits, rehearsing what he might say. Pete had offered to drive him to Billy's house, and Jimmy gratefully accepted. "You're going to be fine," Pete assured him, as they drove through Mason's suburban streets. "Just be yourself, be honest. Let them see the man you've become." Billy's house was a modest 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood. As Pete pulled up to the curb, Jimmy saw the front door open and Billy step out onto the porch. His son had aged in the years since they'd last seen each other. There was gray in his hair now, lines around his eyes. But his face was kind, cautious, but open. "You want me to come in with you?" Pete offered. "No," Jimmy said, taking a deep breath. "This is something I need to do on my own. But thank you for everything. I'll be back in 2 hours to pick you up," Pete said. "Have a good time, Jimmy. You deserve this." Jimmy walked up the driveway on shaky legs. Billy met him halfway, and for a moment father and son just stood there, looking at each other across the distance of lost years. Then Billy extended his hand. "Hi, Dad," he said simply. Jimmy took his son's hand, then pulled him into a hug. Billy stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed and hugged back. "I'm sorry," Jimmy whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know," Billy said quietly. "Come on, let's go inside. There are some people who want to meet you." The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of a home-cooked meal. Rachel was in the kitchen, a petite woman with kind eyes and a cautious smile. She shook Jimmy's hand politely. "It's nice to finally meet you, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Please, call me Jimmy," he said, "and thank you for having me in your home." Then Sophia appeared from the living room, clutching a stuffed dinosaur and watching the stranger with curious eyes. She was even more beautiful in person than in the photos. Billy's eyes, Sarah's smile, a perfect blend of the family Jimmy thought he had lost forever. Jimmy knelt down to her level, his eyes filling with tears. "Hi, Sophia," he said softly. "I'm your grandpa, Jimmy." Sophia studied him for a long moment, then looked up at her father for reassurance. Billy nodded encouragingly. You sent me that picture, Sophia said in her small voice. The one with the stick people. I did, Jimmy confirmed. It's hanging on my wall. It's the most beautiful picture I've ever seen. Do you want to see my dinosaurs? Sophia asked, her shyness beginning to fade. I would love to see your dinosaurs, Jimmy said, his voice breaking with emotion. Sophia took his hand and led him to the living room, where she had an impressive collection of plastic dinosaurs arranged in elaborate scenarios. She told him the name of each one, explaining which ones ate meat and which ones ate plants, which ones could fly and which ones lived in the water. Jimmy listened to every word, as if it were the most important information in the world. During dinner, the conversation was stilted at first. They talked about safe subjects, Billy's work, Rachel's teaching, the weather. But gradually, as the meal progressed, they began to venture into deeper territory. Tell me about your job, Billy said. At the manufacturing plant, Jimmy talked about Henderson Manufacturing, about Carol Hendricks and his co-workers, about the satisfaction of working with his hands again and producing something tangible. He talked about saving money for his own apartment, about the goals he had set for himself. And Pete Rose, Rachel asked. Billy told me the story. Is it true? Did he really just stop and help you? He did, Jimmy confirmed. I was in an alley, freezing, starving, ready to give up. And this stranger walked by and decided I was worth saving. He paid for my hospital stay, got me into new beginnings, helped me find my way back. I don't know where I'd be without him. Dead, probably. That's incredible, Rachel said. You hear stories about celebrities being selfish or out of touch, but he really stepped up. He's a good man, Jimmy said. He's had his own struggles, his own mistakes. I think that's why he understood. He knows what it's like to fall and have to fight your way back up. After dinner, while Rachel put Sophia to bed, Billy and Jimmy sat in the living room. An awkward silence fell between them. I need to say this, Dad, Billy finally said. I need you to understand how hard this has been. When you pushed us away, when you refused our help, it felt like you were choosing the streets over us. It felt like we didn't matter enough for you to accept our help. Jimmy nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know, he said. And you're right, I was selfish. I was so consumed by my own shame and pain that I couldn't see how much I was hurting you. I thought I was protecting you from seeing me at my worst, but really, I was just running away. I'm sorry, Billy. I'm so sorry. Billy's own eyes were wet now. Mom would want you to keep fighting, he said quietly. She would want you to get better, to be part of our lives again. She loved you so much, Dad. Even at the end, even when things were so hard, she loved you. I loved her too, Jimmy said, his voice breaking. Every day I wish I could have saved her. Every day I wish I could have been stronger. You were strong, Billy said firmly. You took care of her when she was sick. You sacrificed everything trying to save her. Nobody could have done more. The system failed you, Dad. The economy failed you. Bad luck failed you. But you didn't fail us. You need to understand that. Those words, coming from his son, meant more to Jimmy than anything else in the world. He had been carrying the weight of failure for so long, convinced that he had let everyone down. But Billy was giving him permission to forgive himself, to see his story differently. Thank you, Jimmy whispered. Thank you for saying that. I want you to be part of Sophia's life, Billy said. I want her to know her grandfather. I want her to understand that people can fall down and get back up, that mistakes don't define us forever. I want her to see strength and resilience, and I want her to see that in you. I would like that more than anything, Jimmy said. When Pete picked Jimmy up 2 hours later, he could see immediately that the visit had gone well. Jimmy's face was tear-stained but glowing. How did it go? Pete asked. I have a family again, Jimmy said simply. I have a son who's willing to give me another chance, and a granddaughter who showed me every single one of her dinosaurs. Pete smiled broadly. That's wonderful, Jimmy. I'm so happy for you. As they drove back through the night, Jimmy looked out the window at the city lights of Cincinnati. Just 4 months ago, he had been dying in an alley, invisible and forgotten. Now he had a job, a place to live, a path forward, and most importantly, a family that was willing to let him back in. Pete, Jimmy said quietly, how do I ever thank you for this? You're doing it right now, Pete said. You're living, you're fighting, you're being a father and a grandfather. That's all the thanks I need. By April, Jimmy had saved enough money to move into his own apartment. It was a small one-bedroom in Northside, an eclectic neighborhood known for its diversity and community spirit. The apartment wasn't fancy, worn carpet, slightly dated appliances, thin walls, but it was his. His own space, his own home, Tom Reynolds from New Beginnings helped him move in, along with a few other residents from the facility. Pete showed up too, bringing housewarming gifts, dishes, towels, a coffee maker, basic supplies to get Jimmy started. Billy and Rachel came by with Sophia, bringing a potted plant and a framed family photo for Jimmy's wall. As Jimmy stood in his empty apartment surrounded by the people who had helped him rebuild his life, he felt overwhelming gratitude. 6 months ago, he had owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a plastic cup. Now he had a home, a job, a family, friends. He had a life again. "Speech! Speech!" Tom called out, and everyone laughed. Jimmy raised his hands, embarrassed but touched. "I don't know what to say except thank you," he began. "Thank you to Tom and everyone at New Beginnings for giving me a safe place to rebuild. Thank you to Carol and my co-workers at Henderson for giving me a chance. Thank you to Billy and Rachel for opening your hearts and your home. Thank you to Pete for seeing me when I was invisible, for stopping when everyone else walked by." His voice cracked with emotion. 6 months ago, I wanted to die. I thought my life was over, that I had nothing left to live for, but you all showed me that it's never too late for a second chance. You showed me that I still matter, that my life still has value and purpose. I will spend the rest of my days trying to deserve the kindness you've shown me. Pete stepped forward and clapped Jimmy on the shoulder. "You already deserve it, Jimmy. Now it's your turn to pass it on." Those words stuck with Jimmy. Pass it on. He had been given so much help, so much support. What was his responsibility now? How could he give back? The answer came a few weeks later when Tom Reynolds called him. "Jimmy, I have a favor to ask," Tom said. "We have a new resident at New Beginnings. Guy named Marcus, mid-50s, just got out of the hospital after nearly dying from exposure. He's in rough shape mentally, won't talk to the counselors, won't engage with the program. I was wondering if you might be willing to talk to him, share your story. Sometimes hearing from someone who's been through it makes a difference." Jimmy agreed immediately. He remembered how alone he had felt, how hard it was to accept help, to believe that things could get better. If he could help someone else the way Pete had helped him, he had to try. Marcus Jackson was a tall, thin black man with haunted eyes and hands that never stopped shaking. He had been a construction foreman before the 2020 pandemic cost him his job. A series of bad breaks, a car accident that left him with chronic pain, an opioid addiction that developed from the pain medication, a robbery that left him beaten and traumatized, had spiraled him into homelessness. Jimmy found Marcus sitting alone in the common room at New Beginnings, staring at nothing. He sat down beside him, saying nothing at first, just being present. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Tom sent you, didn't he? Wants you to give me the pep talk about how everything's going to be okay." "No pep talk," Jimmy said. "I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Jimmy. I lived here for 3 months before getting my own place." Marcus glanced at him skeptically. "Good for you." "I was where you are," Jimmy continued calmly. "Actually, I was probably worse off. At least you made it here. I was living in an alley, freezing to death, ready to let it all end." That got Marcus's attention. He turned to look at Jimmy properly. "What changed?" Marcus asked. "Someone stopped," Jimmy said simply. "Someone saw me when everyone else walked by. He reminded me that I was still human, still worth saving. And then the hard part began, choosing every single day to keep fighting, to do the work, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today." "I'm tired of fighting," Marcus said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I'm tired of losing." "I know," Jimmy said. "God, I know that feeling. But here's what I learned. You don't have to win every battle. You just have to not give up. You just have to keep showing up one day at a time. That's all anyone can ask." Over the following weeks, Jimmy visited Marcus regularly. They'd sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in silence. Jimmy shared his own story in pieces. The job loss, Sarah's illness, the medical bills, the descent into homelessness. He didn't sugarcoat anything or pretend it was easy. But he also shared the victories, getting the job at Henderson, reconnecting with Billy, meeting Sophia, moving into his own apartment. "You have kids?" Marcus asked one day. "2, Jimmy said. "Son and daughter. I pushed them away when I was on the streets. Thought I was protecting them, but really, I was just hurting them more. Took a long time to rebuild those bridges." "I got 3 kids, Marcus said quietly. 2 boys and a girl. Haven't seen them in 2 years. Their mama won't let me near them. Says I'm a danger, says I'm a junkie." "Are you?" Jimmy asked bluntly. "Using, I mean." "Not anymore," Marcus said. "Been clean 4 months, but that doesn't matter to her. She looks at me, and all she sees is what I was, not what I'm trying to become." Then you have to prove her wrong, Jimmy said. Not with words, but with actions. Stay clean, get healthy, get stable. Show her through your life that you've changed. It might take months or years, but if you want your kids back, you have to fight for them. What if it's too late? Marcus asked, voicing his deepest fear. Then you fight anyway, Jimmy said firmly, because at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you gave everything you had. That has to count for something. Jimmy's words seemed to reach Marcus in a way the counselors hadn't. Maybe it was because Jimmy had lived it, had walked the same dark road, or maybe it was just the right time, the right person, the right message. Either way, Marcus started engaging with the program. He attended the sessions, met with his counselor, started looking for work. Pete noticed the change in Jimmy too. His friend had found a new purpose, a new mission beyond just rebuilding his own life. "You're doing good work with Marcus," Pete told Jimmy over their regular Saturday breakfast. "Tom told me you've been spending a lot of time with him. He reminds me of myself," Jimmy said. "Lost, angry, scared. If I can help him find his way like you helped me, then maybe all of this meant something, you know?" "It already means something," Pete said. "But I get what you're saying. There's something powerful about turning your pain into purpose, using what you've learned to help others." "Is that what you're doing?" Jimmy asked. "With me?" Pete considered the question. "Maybe," he admitted. "I've spent a lot of years dealing with my own regrets, my own mistakes, the gambling, the ban from baseball, feeling like I let people down. Maybe helping you is my way of trying to balance the scales, trying to be the person I wish I'd been all along." "You've always been that person," Jimmy said firmly. "You just didn't see it." "Pete, you're in the record books. You got 4,256 hits. That's incredible. But that's not why people love you. They love you because you gave everything you had every single time you stepped on the field. You played the game the way it was meant to be played, with heart, with passion, with absolute commitment. That's who you are." Pete's eyes got a little misty. "Thanks, Jimmy. That means a lot coming from you." In May, something happened that would change the trajectory of both Jimmy's and Pete's lives. A local news reporter named Sarah Chen had heard rumors about Pete Rose helping a homeless man and wanted to do a story. She reached out to Pete through his agent, requesting an interview. Pete was initially hesitant. He had learned to be wary of media attention, knowing how easily his words could be twisted or taken out of context. But Sarah was persistent, and eventually Pete agreed, on the condition that Jimmy was comfortable being part of the story. Jimmy was nervous about going public. He had worked hard to rebuild his life quietly, without fanfare, but Tom Reynolds convinced him it might help others. "Think about how many people are struggling out there," Tom said. "How many people feel invisible and forgotten, just like you did. Your story could give them hope. It could inspire others to reach out and help." So Jimmy agreed. The interview took place at New Beginnings, with both Pete and Jimmy present. Sarah Chen was a skilled journalist in her 30s, who had built her career on human interest stories that highlighted the best of humanity. She started with Pete. "Mr. Rose, can you tell me about the day you met Jimmy?" Pete described that December afternoon, the snow falling, the man huddled in the alley. He talked about something compelling him to stop, to talk to Jimmy, to help. "Why did you stop?" Sarah asked. "Most people would have walked by." "I've been knocked down in my life," Pete said. "Not homeless, but knocked down in other ways. I know what it feels like when people write you off, when they decide you're not worth their time or compassion. I couldn't walk by someone who was hurting like that. It just wasn't in me." Then Sarah turned to Jimmy. "Mr. Caldwell, can you describe what that moment was like for you, when Pete stopped to talk to you?" Jimmy took a deep breath. "I was ready to die," he said bluntly. "I had given up. When you're on the streets, you become invisible. People look right through you, like you're not even human anymore. But Pete, he saw me. He looked me in the eyes and treated me like I mattered. That simple act of recognition, of dignity, it reminded me that I was still a person. It gave me just enough hope to take his hand and start climbing back up." The interview continued for over an hour. They talked about Jimmy's journey, the hospital stay, new beginnings, the job at Henderson Manufacturing, reconnecting with his son. They talked about Pete's continued involvement, how he had become not just a benefactor, but a friend and mentor. "What do you want people to take away from this story?" Sarah asked. Pete and Jimmy looked at each other, and Jimmy nodded for Pete to answer. "That everyone deserves a second chance," Pete said. "That the person you walk by on the street has a story, a history, people who love them. They're not just a problem to be ignored or a statistic. They're human beings who've hit hard times and need help. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop and extend a hand. And from your perspective, Mr. Caldwell, Sarah asked Jimmy. That it's never too late, Jimmy said. No matter how far you've fallen, no matter how dark things get, there's always a path back if you're willing to take it. It won't be easy. You'll have to fight every single day. But it's possible. If I can do it, anyone can. The story aired 2 weeks later on the local news, a 6-minute segment during the evening broadcast. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The news station was flooded with calls and emails. Some were from people inspired by the story, wanting to help organizations like New Beginnings. Others were from people currently homeless or struggling, asking for resources and help. Still others were from people who had family members experiencing homelessness, desperate for guidance on how to help them. Pete and Jimmy were stunned by the reaction. Neither had anticipated the impact their story would have. We need to do something with this, Pete said after the 3rd day of non-stop calls and messages. People want to help. We need to give them a way to do it. That's when the idea for the Pete Rose Second Chances Foundation was born. Working with Tom Reynolds and a team of lawyers and nonprofit experts, Pete established a foundation dedicated to helping people transition out of homelessness and into stable housing and employment. The foundation would provide grants to organizations like New Beginnings, fund job training programs, and offer direct assistance to individuals working to rebuild their lives. Jimmy became the foundation's first employee, hired as the outreach coordinator. His job was to connect with people experiencing homelessness, share his story, and help guide them toward resources and support. It was perfect, taking everything he had learned and using it to help others walk the same difficult path. The foundation's launch event in June drew hundreds of people. Local businesses donated money and resources. Politicians gave speeches about the importance of addressing homelessness. News crews covered the event, spreading the message even further. But the most moving moment came when Marcus Jackson took the stage. 3 months ago, I was where Jimmy was, Marcus told the crowd, his voice strong and clear. I had given up. I didn't think my life had any value anymore. But Jimmy didn't give up on me. He sat with me, talked to me, showed me that recovery was possible because he had done it himself. Today, I'm 30 days into a new job. I'm clean. I'm working on rebuilding my relationship with my kids. And I'm standing here to say thank you to Jimmy, to Pete, to everyone who believes that people like us deserve a second chance. The crowd erupted in applause. Jimmy, standing off to the side, had tears streaming down his face. After the event, as people mingled and talked, a young woman approached Jimmy nervously. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I'm Emma, your daughter." Jimmy froze. He hadn't seen Emma in over 3 years. She had been 19 when Sarah died, angry and hurt, and desperate to escape the pain. She had moved to Denver and cut off contact with everyone. Now she stood before him, older, more mature, but still his little girl. "Emma," he whispered, barely able to speak. "You came. Billy told me about everything," she said, her own eyes wet with tears. "About Pete, about New Beginnings, about the foundation. I watched the news story. Dad, I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." "No," Jimmy said firmly, pulling her into a hug. "I'm the one who's sorry. I pushed you away when you tried to help. That was my fault, not yours." They held each other for a long moment, crying and laughing at the same time. "I want to be part of your life again," Emma said, "if you'll let me." "Always," Jimmy said, "always, sweetheart." That night, after the event ended and everyone had gone home, Pete and Jimmy sat on a bench outside the venue, looking up at the stars. "Can you believe this?" Jimmy asked. 6 months ago, I was dying in an alley. Now I'm helping run a foundation. I have both my kids back. I have a purpose. It doesn't seem real." "It's real," Pete assured him. "You earned every bit of it." "We earned it," Jimmy corrected. "None of this happens without you, Pete. You started this by stopping in that alley. And you continued it by choosing to fight," Pete said. "That was the hard part, Jimmy. That was all you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two men who had found each other at exactly the right moment, whose lives had become intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. "What's next?" Jimmy finally asked. Pete smiled. "We keep going. We help more people. We build something that lasts. We show the world that everyone deserves dignity, respect, and a second chance." "Sounds like a plan," Jimmy said. The Pete Rose Second Chances Foundation grew rapidly over the following year. What started as a local Cincinnati initiative expanded to cities across Ohio, then to neighboring states. The model was simple but effective. Identify people who were genuinely committed to rebuilding their lives, provide them with comprehensive support, housing, job training, counseling, medical care, and connect them with mentors who had walked the same path. Jimmy became the face of the foundation, traveling to different cities to speak at events, meet with potential clients, and train volunteers. His story resonated with people from all walks of life. He spoke at high schools, teaching young people about empathy and the importance of seeing the humanity in everyone. He spoke at corporate events, encouraging businesses to give second chances to people with gaps in their employment history. He spoke at churches, shelters, and community centers, offering hope to those who had lost it. Marcus Jackson became one of the foundation's success stories and eventually joined the staff as a peer counselor. He had successfully reconnected with his children and was working steadily in construction again. His story inspired others who were fighting addiction and rebuilding their lives. By the foundation's first anniversary, they had helped over 200 people transition out of homelessness. Not all of them succeeded. Some relapsed, some gave up, some disappeared back into the streets. But many did make it. Many rebuilt their lives, reconnected with their families, found work and purpose and dignity again. Pete remained actively involved, though he avoided the spotlight when possible. He preferred to work behind the scenes, making calls, raising money, connecting with donors. But occasionally he would visit the foundation's various program sites, meeting with clients and volunteers, offering encouragement and support. One cold January afternoon, exactly 1 year after Jimmy had moved into his apartment, Pete drove to Henderson Manufacturing to pick Jimmy up after work. They were heading to a foundation board meeting, but Pete had something else in mind first. "Before we go to the meeting, I want to show you something," Pete said. He drove them back downtown to Vine Street, to the alley where they had first met. The alley looked different now. The city had cleaned it up as part of a broader downtown revitalization effort, but it was still recognizable. They got out of the car and walked to the spot where Jimmy had been sitting that December day. "Why are we here?" Jimmy asked, confused. Pete pulled out a small plaque from his jacket. On it was engraved, "In this place, 2 lives changed forever. December 18th, 2024, where hope met desperation and compassion defeated indifference. May we always stop for those who need us." "I had this made," Pete explained. "I talked to the city, and they're going to install it here, on the wall. A reminder, not just of what happened to us, but of what's possible when people choose to care." Jimmy read the plaque again, tears streaming down his face. "Pete, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Pete said. "I just wanted you to see where it all started, and to remind you how far you've come." They stood there for a while, 2 men in an alley, remembering. At the board meeting that evening, the foundation's director presented the year-end report. The numbers were impressive. People housed, people employed, families reunited. But Jimmy knew the real success couldn't be measured in statistics. It was measured in moments, in a father hugging his son for the first time in years, in a woman getting her first paycheck after months of unemployment, in a man looking in the mirror and recognizing himself again. After the meeting, as board members mingled and discussed plans for the coming year, Billy approached Jimmy with Sophia in tow. They had become regular fixtures at foundation events, with Billy serving on the board and Rachel volunteering as a tutor for clients working to improve their education. "Grandpa Jimmy!" Sophia called out, running to him. Jimmy scooped up his granddaughter, who was now 4 years old and full of questions about everything. "Are you helping people tonight?" she asked. "We're always helping people, sweetheart," Jimmy said. "That's what we do." "Because Uncle Pete helped you," Sophia said matter-of-factly. She had heard the story many times and loved to retell it in her own words. "That's right," Jimmy confirmed. "And now we help other people, so they can help even more people. It's like a circle that keeps getting bigger." "I want to help people too when I grow up," Sophia announced. Jimmy's heart swelled with pride and love. "You will, sweetheart. You will." Emma came to visit from Denver that spring, staying for a week to work with the foundation's art therapy program. She had rediscovered her love of painting and was using it to help others express their emotions and process their trauma. Watching his daughter work with clients, seeing her patience and compassion, Jimmy felt a profound sense of gratitude. His family had not just forgiven him, they had joined him in his mission. On a warm May evening, the foundation organized its first annual fundraising gala. It was held at the Duke Energy Convention Center, a massive venue overlooking the Ohio River. Over 500 people attended: donors, volunteers, clients, supporters, media. The event raised over $800,000 for the foundation's programs. Jimmy was asked to give a speech. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt overwhelmed by how much had changed in just 18 months. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, and the audience laughed warmly. "I'm a machinist, not a public speaker. But I want to tell you what this foundation means to me, and why your support matters so much." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 18 months ago, I was invisible. I was a ghost haunting the streets of this city, forgotten by everyone, including myself. I had lost everything: my wife, my home, my dignity, my hope. I was ready to disappear completely. And then a stranger stopped. Pete Rose, a man who owed me nothing, who had every reason to walk by like everyone else did. He stopped. He saw me. He helped me. And he didn't just give me money or a meal. He gave me something more valuable. He gave me back my humanity. The room was completely silent, every person focused on Jimmy's words. But here's what I learned. I was never really invisible. I was there the whole time. I was always human, always worthy of dignity and respect. What changed was that someone finally recognized it. Someone finally looked at me and saw not a problem or a statistic, but a person who needed help. Jimmy's voice grew stronger. There are thousands of people in this city alone who are invisible right now. They're sleeping under bridges, in alleys, in shelters, in their cars. They have stories, families, dreams. They had jobs and homes and lives before circumstances beyond their control knocked them down. They're not lazy. They're not looking for handouts. They're desperate for a chance to rebuild, for someone to see them, to believe in them. He looked directly at Pete, who stood at the side of the room. Pete showed me that one person can make a difference. One act of compassion can change a life. And that changed life can change another life and another, creating a ripple effect of hope and healing. That's what this foundation is about. We're not just helping people, we're reminding them and reminding ourselves that everyone matters, everyone deserves a second chance, everyone has value. The audience erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering. Emma was crying. Billy had his arm around Rachel. Sophia was jumping up and down with excitement, and Pete, standing off to the side, had tears streaming down his weathered face. After the gala, as the crowd dispersed and the event staff cleaned up, Pete and Jimmy stood on the convention center's terrace, looking out at the Cincinnati skyline reflected in the dark waters of the Ohio River. "Hell of a speech," Pete said. "Learned from the best," Jimmy replied. "You taught me that actions speak louder than words." "I'm just trying to put the actions into words so others will understand." Pete was quiet for a moment. "You know, Jimmy, I've had a lot of achievements in my life. 4,256 hits, 3 World Series championships, 17 All-Star games, most games played, most at-bats, records that will probably never be broken, but none of that feels as meaningful as what we've built here. This foundation, helping people, giving them hope, this matters more than any baseball game ever did." "It matters because you made it matter," Jimmy said. "You took your second chance and used it to give others their second chances. That's a legacy worth having." They stood together in comfortable silence, two men whose lives had become permanently intertwined, whose chance meeting had sparked something larger than either of them could have imagined. "What do you think?" Pete finally asked. "Think we can keep this going? Keep helping people?" "Absolutely," Jimmy said without hesitation. "As long as there are people who need help, we'll be there. That's what we do now. That's who we are." Pete nodded, satisfied. "Good, because I'm not done yet. Not by a long shot." As summer turned to fall, the foundation continued to grow and evolve. They opened a second facility in Columbus, then a third in Cleveland. They partnered with other organizations to provide more comprehensive services. They developed specialized programs for veterans, for people recovering from addiction, for families with children. Jimmy's relationship with his children deepened. Billy and Rachel had another baby, a boy they named James after Jimmy. Emma moved back to Cincinnati, taking a job as the foundation's art therapy director. The family gathered regularly for Sunday dinners, rebuilding the bonds that had been broken by tragedy and hardship. On a crisp October afternoon, Jimmy received a call from Carol Hendricks at Henderson Manufacturing. "Caldwell, you got a minute?" she asked. "For you? Always, Ms. Hendricks." "I've been thinking," Carol said. "We've had good luck hiring people from New Beginnings and the foundation. They're reliable, hardworking, grateful for the opportunity. I want to formalize a partnership, Create a direct pipeline where we commit to interviewing and hiring qualified candidates you send our way. What do you think? Jimmy felt a surge of excitement. I think that's exactly the kind of partnership we need. People want to work. They just need someone to give them a chance. Then let's make it happen, Carol said. Send me a proposal and we'll work out the details. More and more businesses followed Henderson's example. A construction company committed to hiring 5 people per quarter. A landscaping firm created an apprenticeship program. A hospital system developed a training program for people interested in healthcare support roles. The foundation was creating not just individual success stories, but systemic change, building a network of employers willing to look beyond gaps in resumes and see the potential in people fighting to rebuild their lives. In December, exactly 2 years after that fateful day in the alley, the foundation organized a special commemoration event. They gathered at the site where the plaque had been installed, now a small memorial garden that the city had helped create. The alley had been transformed with plants, benches, and lighting, a symbol of how spaces and lives could be renewed. Over 100 people attended, foundation clients past and present, staff, volunteers, donors, and media. The mayor of Cincinnati gave a speech about the importance of compassion and community. Tom Reynolds spoke about how the foundation had revolutionized the approach to homelessness in the city. Then Pete took the microphone. 2 years ago, I walked down this street on a cold December day, he began. I was heading to my car, thinking about dinner, about mundane, everyday things. And then I saw Jimmy. I could have walked by. Most people did, but something told me to stop. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was divine intervention. Maybe it was just basic human decency. Whatever it was, I'm grateful I listened to it. He looked at Jimmy, who stood beside him. What I didn't know then was that I wasn't just saving Jimmy's life. I was saving my own. I had spent years feeling sorry for myself, dwelling on my mistakes and my exile from baseball. I was bitter about the Hall of Fame, angry at the world, stuck in the past. But helping Jimmy reminded me of something important. Life isn't about what you've lost. It's about what you do with what you have left. Pete's voice grew emotional. Jimmy gave me purpose again. He showed me that it's never too late to matter, to make a difference, to leave a legacy that's about more than statistics and records. This foundation, these hundreds of lives we've touched, this is what I want to be remembered for. Not the hits or the games, but this, the moment I chose to stop and care. Jimmy stepped forward and took the microphone. Pete keeps saying he saved my life, Jimmy said. And he did. But what he doesn't understand is that it works both ways. I gave him purpose, sure, but he gave me back everything. My dignity, my family, my future. He reminded me that I mattered when I had forgotten. He fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. He didn't just save my life, he showed me how to live again. He turned to face the crowd. Every single person here has the power to do what Pete did. You don't need money or fame. You just need to see people, really see them. Stop when you want to walk by. Listen when it would be easier to ignore. Care when indifference is more comfortable. That's how we change the world. One stopped conversation at a time, one extended hand, one act of compassion. Marcus Jackson stepped forward, followed by a dozen other foundation clients who had successfully rebuilt their lives. They stood in a line facing the crowd. We are the second chances, Marcus said, his voice strong and proud. We are the people who fell and got back up. We are the proof that change is possible, that redemption is real, that every life has value. We are here because someone stopped, someone cared, someone believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves. One by one, each person shared their story in brief. A woman named Teresa, who had lost her job as a teacher and ended up living in her car, now teaching again at an elementary school. A man named David, who had struggled with PTSD after military service, now working as a counselor for other veterans. A young woman named Alicia, who had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go, now in college studying social work. Each story was unique, but they all shared common threads: loss, struggle, desperation, and then hope. Hope that came in the form of someone who stopped, who cared, who helped. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, an elderly woman approached Pete and Jimmy. She was small and frail, probably in her 80s, bundled in a heavy coat against the December cold. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Pete Rose?" "Yes, ma'am," Pete said politely. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "My grandson, he was homeless for 3 years. Drugs, mental illness, the whole thing. We tried everything, but he wouldn't accept help. He was so angry, so lost. Then someone from your foundation found him, talked to him, convinced him to come in. That was 8 months ago. Last week he called me. He's clean, he's working. He wants to see me again." Her voice broke. "You gave me back my grandson. You gave our family hope. I'll never forget that." "Never." Pete was visibly moved. "What's your grandson's name?" he asked. "Daniel," she said. "Daniel Morrison. I'll make sure to look him up," Pete promised. "Ma'am, he did the hard work. We just opened the door. He's the one who walked through it." "But without that door," she said, squeezing his hand, "he'd still be lost. Thank you so much." After she left, Pete turned to Jimmy with wonder in his eyes. "You hear that? We helped her get her grandson back. That's a whole family restored." "That's what we do," Jimmy said simply. "One family at a time, one life at a time." That evening, the core group gathered at Pete's house for a private dinner. Pete, Jimmy, Billy, Rachel, Emma, Tom Reynolds, Marcus, and Carol Hendricks. It was an intimate gathering of the people who had been there from the beginning, who had built something meaningful together. Over dinner, they reminisced about the past 2 years, sharing stories and memories. Emma talked about how the art therapy program had expanded to serve over 50 clients. Billy discussed the foundation's financial health and plans for future growth. Marcus shared that his oldest son had reached out and they were slowly rebuilding their relationship. Carol mentioned that Henderson was planning to expand their partnership with the foundation, creating even more job opportunities. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sophia fell asleep on her grandpa Jimmy's lap. Jimmy held her gently, this precious child who represented hope and renewal, the future built on the foundation of a difficult past. "She's lucky to have you," Pete said quietly, watching them. "I'm the lucky one," Jimmy corrected. "All of this, the foundation, my family, this life, it all started because you stopped, because you cared. I'll never be able to repay that debt." "There's no debt," Pete said firmly. "What we have here, what we've built, it's not about owing or repaying. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that we're all responsible for each other. You would have done the same for me if our positions were reversed." "In a heartbeat," Jimmy agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, two friends who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, whose lives had become permanently intertwined. "You know what's funny?" Pete said after a while. "People still ask me all the time about the Hall of Fame. Will I ever get in? Do I think I deserve it? Does the band bother me? And yeah, it does sometimes. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. But then I think about all this, the foundation, the lives we've changed, the families we've reunited, and I realize I've already got my legacy. This is my Hall of Fame. You belong in both," Jimmy said, "but this one matters more." Pete smiled. "Yeah, it does." As spring arrived again, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and fresh starts, the foundation announced a major milestone. They had successfully helped their 1,000th person transition out of homelessness. The person who reached that milestone was a woman named Grace, a former nurse who had lost her job during the pandemic and struggled with depression. She was now working at a clinic and volunteering at the foundation, helping others navigate their own journeys. The celebration was modest, the foundation team and board gathering at New Beginnings for cake and speeches. But the significance was profound. 1,000 lives changed. 1,000 people given hope and opportunity. 1,000 families affected by the ripple effects of compassion. Grace stood before the group, her voice steady and strong. "I was person number 1,000, she said. "But I know I won't be the last. This foundation, what Pete and Jimmy and all of you have built, it's going to keep growing. It's going to keep helping people. And someday, the number won't be 1,000. It'll be 10,000, 100,000, because the need is that great. But more importantly, because the compassion is that great too. You've proven that." Jimmy thought about how far they had come. From a chance encounter in an alley to a thriving foundation touching thousands of lives. From desperation and despair to hope and purpose. From invisibility to impact. That summer, Pete received an invitation that surprised everyone. The National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown wanted to host an exhibition about second chances in baseball, featuring stories of players who had overcome adversity, fought back from career-threatening injuries or personal struggles, and found redemption. They wanted to include Pete's story, not as a player, but as a humanitarian. It wasn't induction and the band still stood, but it was recognition, acknowledgement that Pete Rose was more than his mistakes, that his life had meaning beyond the gambling scandal. Pete called Jimmy immediately. "They want to feature the foundation," Pete explained. "Tell the story of what we've built. It's not the Hall of Fame, not really, but it's something." "Are you going to do it?" Jimmy asked. Pete was quiet for a moment. "Only if you come with me. This isn't just my story, it's ours. If they want to tell it, they need to tell all of it." So in August, Pete and Jimmy traveled to Cooperstown together. The exhibition was called More Than the Game: Baseball's Second Chances, and it featured dozens of stories of redemption and resilience. But the centerpiece was the story of Pete and Jimmy, the legend who stopped and the forgotten man who rose. They displayed the original plaque from the alley, along with photos documenting Jimmy's transformation. There were statistics about the foundation's impact, testimonials from people whose lives had been changed, and a video presentation featuring interviews with Pete, Jimmy, Marcus, and others. During the opening reception, dozens of Hall of Fame players attended. Many approached Pete, shaking his hand, congratulating him on the foundation's work. Some admitted they had misjudged him, had thought of him only as the man who bet on baseball, not as the complete human being he was. Johnny Bench, Pete's longtime friend and Reds teammate, pulled him aside. "I'm proud of you, Pete," Bench said. "This foundation, what you're doing, it matters more than any game we ever played. You found your way back to what's important." "Took me long enough," Pete said with a self-deprecating smile. "We all take our own time," Bench said. "What matters is you got there." Standing in the Hall of Fame, surrounded by plaques honoring the greatest players in baseball history, Pete felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in decades. He would never have his own plaque on these walls, would never be formally inducted, would never have his achievements officially recognized by the institution he had devoted his life to. But he had something else. He had purpose. He had meaning. He had made a real difference in people's lives. And that, he realized, was worth more than any plaque. Jimmy stood beside him, looking around at the exhibits with wonder. "This is incredible," Jimmy said. "All this history, all these legends, and they're telling our story alongside them." "Our story is worth telling," Pete said, "not because of me, but because of what it represents. Hope, redemption, second chances. That's what baseball has always been about at its best, and that's what life should be about too." As they walked through the exhibition, a young boy, maybe 10 years old, approached them shyly. He was wearing a Cincinnati Reds jersey with Rose's number 14 on the back. "Excuse me," the boy said. "Are you Pete Rose?" "I am," Pete said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "My dad says you're the greatest hitter who ever lived," the boy said. "Is that true?" Pete smiled. "I got a lot of hits," he admitted. "But you know what? That's not what makes someone great. What makes someone great is how they treat other people, how they help others, how they use whatever talents they have to make the world better. You remember that, okay?" The boy nodded seriously, then extended a baseball and a marker. "Can I have your autograph?" Pete signed the ball, then wrote a message. "Never stop caring. Never walk by someone who needs help. Pete Rose." He handed the ball back to the boy. "You keep that," Pete said. "And remember what it says." The boy's face lit up. "I will, thank you." As the boy ran back to his parents, Jimmy put a hand on Pete's shoulder. "You just changed that kid's life," Jimmy said. "Maybe," Pete said. "Or maybe I just reminded him of something he already knew. Either way, if he remembers it, if he lives it, then it was worth signing." The trip to Cooperstown became a turning point for the foundation. The national exposure from the Hall of Fame exhibition brought attention and funding from across the country. Organizations in other cities reached out, wanting to replicate the model. Donors stepped forward with significant contributions. The foundation's reach extended beyond Ohio, planting seeds of hope in communities throughout the United States. By the foundation's third anniversary, they had helped over 3,000 people rebuild their lives. They had partnerships with 200 employers across 8 states. They had expanded their services to include mental health counseling, addiction recovery support, legal aid, and education assistance. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the real impact. The real impact was in the moments. In the father reuniting with his daughter after years of estrangement, in the veteran finding purpose again after years of struggling with PTSD, in the single mother securing stable housing for her children, in the recovering addict celebrating 1 year of sobriety. Each story was a testament to the power of human resilience and compassion. One December evening, 3 years after their first meeting, Pete and Jimmy returned to the memorial garden where the alley used to be. Snow was falling again, just like it had that first day. The garden was peaceful, illuminated by soft lights, the plaque gleaming against the brick wall. They sat on one of the benches, 2 old friends, comfortable in silence. You ever think about where you'd be if I hadn't stopped that day? Pete asked. Dead, Jimmy said without hesitation. No question. I wouldn't have made it through another week. And I'd probably be sitting in my house, bitter and alone, still dwelling on the Hall of Fame and feeling sorry for myself, Pete said. We saved each other, Jimmy. We did, Jimmy agreed. Two broken people who found each other at exactly the right time. They watched the snow fall, covering the garden in a blanket of white, pure and clean and full of possibility. You know what I've learned, Jimmy said. That the worst moment of your life can become the doorway to the best part of your life. That day in the alley, when I thought everything was over, that was actually the beginning, the real beginning. Second chances, Pete said. That's what it's all about. Second chances, Jimmy echoed. As they sat there in the falling snow, they thought about all the lives that had been changed, all the people who had been given hope, all the families that had been reunited. They thought about the Foundation's continued growth and the promise of helping even more people in the years to come. But mostly, they thought about that one December day when a baseball legend stopped in an alley and saw a forgotten man, when compassion defeated indifference. When one simple act of kindness created ripples that would extend far beyond anything either man could have imagined. The snow continued to fall, covering the city in white. Inside homes all across Cincinnati and beyond, people who had once been homeless now sat warm and safe, building new lives, dreaming new dreams. People who had been invisible were visible again. People who had been forgotten were remembered. And it all started because one person stopped, because one person cared. Because one person chose to see the humanity in someone everyone else had looked past. Pete Rose had 4,256 hits in his baseball career. But his greatest hit, the one that would echo through time and touch countless lives, was the moment he extended his hand to Jimmy Caldwell in that frozen alley. That was the hit that mattered most. That was the legacy that would endure. As the snow fell and the evening grew darker, Pete and Jimmy stood up from the bench and walked out of the memorial garden together. Behind them, the plaque gleamed in the lamplight, its message simple but profound. In this place, two lives changed forever, where hope met desperation and compassion defeated indifference. May we always stop for those who need us. They walked down the street side by side, two men who had found redemption in each other, heading home to the lives they had built together from the ruins of what they had lost. The snow covered their footprints behind them, but the path they had forged, the path of compassion, second chances and unwavering hope, would remain visible for all who chose to see it. And somewhere in the city, someone else was struggling, invisible and forgotten, wondering if anyone would ever stop. The Foundation would find them, someone would care, because that's what Pete and Jimmy had proven, that it's never too late, that everyone matters, that one person can make all the difference. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the world. And it all began with one simple choice: to stop when everyone else walked by.